Hey, welcome back everyone to our first session at Big Rig. And let me talk about the session and then we'll introduce our guests. So the session is called How Stack is Your Customer Success Tech Stack? And we're lucky enough to have a lot of the vendors that probably play a role in your tech stack. And we'll really just talk about, what we can do about, filling the missing components in our tech stack, how to talk about it, how to get ROI behind it. But let's go ahead and start. Jay, Nathan, Greg Rose, and Melinda Gonzalez are here joining us. And let me give them 30 seconds to introduce themselves a little bit and also their organization. And we'll start. Let's start with Jay in the upper left, at least my upper left.
Me too. Yeah, cool. Hi, Umon. Good to see you. Good to see you, Greg and Melinda. My name's Jay Nathan. I am the Chief Customer Officer at a company called Higher Logic, which is a community platform software company based out of the DC area, and also the co-founder of the Gain, Grow, Retain customer success community. So glad to be here. Good to see y'all.
Yeah, and if you haven't joined Gain, Grow, Retain, please do so. It's a great community for CS professionals. Let's go to Greg next. Greg, can you hear me?
Oh, I got you. Sorry, there was a short lag. Hey, everybody. Okay. I'm Greg Rose. I'm the CXO at Intellum. Intellum is a learning technology company. We help our clients educate customers, partners, employees on the products and the services that they sell. So happy to be here. Happy to sit with Jay and Melinda, two super awesome pros. I'm going to get a lot out of this today.
Thanks, Greg. We're going to have a fun. And Melinda.
Hi, very excited to be here and having this conversation with all of you. I'm Melinda Gonzalez. I am Vice President of Customer Success at Pendo. We are a product analytics and digital adoption solution. So both a solution for your customer-facing, your customers with your products, as well as your internal employees. I've been here for about 15 months. So I'm really excited to have this conversation. I'm a big believer in product-led customer success, so that might get woven into some of my discussion here, and looking forward to the conversation.
All right, well, welcome everyone. Great panel, really represent many components of the stack that you may have already be building or already have or building in your customer success organization. Well, let's start with the highest level question, right? Which is, do you think the customer success stack is too stacked, right? Or the opposite? Do you think it's underfunded? Do you think it's underdeveloped? Do you think it's undervalued even? And maybe, hey, Melinda, why don't we start with you on this one? What's your sense of that question?
Yeah, part of me feels like it's actually maybe a little of everything. I think at the end, I feel like it's kind of misunderstood. There are a lot of pieces to try to put together in terms of what your CS stack looks like. I think that, represented by those of us who are here today, right? There's a number of us who are part of that tech stack. So the misunderstanding, I think, stems from a situation where I think people tend to focus first on the technology and thinking the technology is going to solve their problems and build their processes and define those. And I think that's a really common mistake that I feel like a lot of companies make. I personally definitely lean towards using a tool of customer journey mapping to take a step back and understand the entirety of the customer journey and what you're actually trying to deliver on at different stages of that journey. And then I back into the tech stack from there. So that's maybe a different lens to take. But I do think sometimes out of just for a lot of reasons, people tend to focus on the tech stack first when I feel like maybe it should be flipped.
I think you're right. Technology doesn't solve every problem, right? You have to sort of lay out the journey first. Any advice? Maybe anything to add on that? Maybe I'll turn to you, Greg.
I think I agree with Melinda. I think we're going to do a lot of agreeing today. I suspect I agree is probably going to be something we hear a lot. I think undervalued is the place I start, and therefore underfunded. It's definitely complex. I think that because CS is still largely a new motion, it's hard to get funding for what you need 3 years from now. And so I think people sort of know where they want to go. I think when you're sort of fighting for the first time or in early stages of like budget, it's hard to get the thing that you want in that future state. Like I'll say it a little differently. Software tools are tied to maturity. I'll ask Jay this question when he kind of picks up here in a second, but like I think CS is a rapidly evolving and advancing function area much faster. I think the maturity it's going much quicker than other function areas. And so CS is probably, for a lot of us, already outgrowing the solutions in place. So then we get to this thing where we're like, well, what stays? What goes? Like, we saw a little bit of this in learning over the years too, that this like rapid growth sort of then leads to stack reduction. And so now it's like, like what tools are we using? Are we using everything we bought in the new tool? Are we still holding on to the stuff in the old tool? And in that way, I think we're seeing already, like really quickly, these complex stacks where there's some redundancy and maybe not full utilization yet.
So Greg, I like that. So you're talking about the department's fast moving.
Mm-hmm.
Is it fast moving because each individual department is growing their CS department quickly, or do you think as an ecosystem we're fast moving? Because there's sort of change within your own organization. Are you improving your tech stack? And then there's change as an ecosystem, right? Like best practices are changing. Oh, by the way, we used to call these things this. Now we decidedly call these things that. And then the tools have to follow. Like when you say fast moving, is it micro or is it macro?
I think it's industry. When I think about it, I'm thinking that CS as a motion, it seems incredibly fast moving to me. It's just, we're making leaps and bounds really quickly, and processes being set, thought leadership, is there. You've got examples from pioneers and early adopters of massive success, which again is something I think there's a parallel to education here too. We see some of that in learning where, organizations can just make huge impacts with an investment in something like CS. I think, again, that sort of leads to all these scenarios like I was just describing, where we get these complicated stacks because we're outgrowing the things we're buying very quickly. That seems unique to me to CS. I don't think the same thing is true in marketing, for example, right? Marketing sort of has defined stack. It's slow rolling. You sort of know where the maturity milestones are. You're preparing to buy the next sort of thing you need. You don't sort of rush into marketing automation. You know when you need it. You're planning for it. CS seems different to me. I think we move much quicker, but there's some potential redundancy there as a result.
And Jay, what do you think? Those Greg's make some really good points.
Yeah, as Greg was talking, I was actually thinking about the marketing stack, Greg, which I know is near and dear to your heart, but that's a much more mature environment, right? While you do have your pillar platforms like marketing automation, you've got literally thousands, right, of point solutions coming along to handle edge cases of the experience that you're trying to create with the market that you're trying to touch.
Yep.
So I would say that initially I thought, it's pretty well stacked, but if you step back and look at it, I think it's only at its infancy right now. And we've started with platforms that sort of sit on top of the CRM. And I think we're going to touch on CRM and some of the other components, the pillar components of the stack as we go along here. But what we're just now starting to see is the emergence of tools hitting the market that are really driving the engagement between our customers and us. Mm-hmm. So it's not only a back office kind of workflow platform, it's really touching the customer directly. Pendo is a great example of that. We run Pendo internally at Higher Logic, and it's allowed us to drive engagement with our customers, community, all these other pieces. I think the biggest piece that we do not have that maybe the other functional areas of the business do have is the integration story is still taking shape. Who are the primary players in the space? How do they natively integrate with one another? So when I'm, taking on a role or bringing in technology to a SaaS company, I know what the 3 or 4 options that I have are. We're not anywhere close to that.
Mm-hmm.
Yet.
Well, maybe I can summarize a little bit. And Melinda, I'm going to ask you to keep me honest on this, okay? So map your journeys, okay? Put technology where it matters, but expect it to change, right? Expect you swapping out, components of the stack over time because we're still in early stages of actually developing, a mature tech stack for the CS, a CS department. Is that a fair statement here? Okay, so we're maybe pretty stacked, but it's still early days.
Mm.
Yeah, I want to maybe just touch on just the specific example around marketing, the marketing tech stack. I think the conversation that we're actively having, such a tangible example here at Pendo is, the marketing tech stack exists for revenue generation and pipeline creation, right? So that's their focus. We care about revenue too. We're using ChurnZero. We care about revenue too. We're using it to retain and grow revenue. So there's a pretty massive overlap between what marketing's goals are and what our goals are. And we're actively having conversations around, well, how much does marketing use ChurnZero? And how much do we combine our efforts there? And what does that look like? And that's a very tangible example of where I will always, and I say this because we're kicking off a customer journey specifically for enterprise onboarding for Q4. It's an initiative for us where we're going to take a step back and really understand what does that onboarding experience look like for our enterprise customers. And then I'm going to back into what's the technology that we need to bring to bear to support those touch points. So that maybe makes it a little more concrete.
Well, we have a lot. We can dig into that, and let's do that. But let's put a bow on this one, and I'm gonna pull my old man card out and then talk about marketing. And you guys tell me what you think. So, the marketing automation tools is actually still relatively new, right? Like in the course of history, it's probably 10, 15 years old. And I just remember it was kind of chaos for a while because marketing was done differently no matter where you went. There was a brand person there, blah, 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 and so there was no good tech. In fact, marketing had almost no tech for a long time. It was only when they all agreed on certain things, like, oh, this is what, let's all agree that there's something called an MQL, right? Let's all agree there's something called an SQL. And let's all agree that, in fact, the idea is that we're trying to attract people to come into our site, come somewhere, and then we manage them and then hand them over, score them, and hand them over to sales. Simplistic, right? But once that happened, that was when that whole industry exploded, right? That's when the Eloquas and Marketos and the and the HubSpots all just went crazy, and it was just really a definition of terms and best practices. And I guess I see that with customer success. We're kind of shaking out all the different ways we're doing things, and if we can agree that there's just a handful of ways of doing customer success, then that's when the stack starts to mature. Is that a fair analogy? Using marketing, for CS. Anybody here?
Yes, I think it's a great analogy. I think we'll probably talk a little bit about money before this conversation's over. But I think, Yuman, that's where there's an additional component to that, and that is cash, money, and investment, because that creates a market and an opportunity to sell product and to differentiate and to provide value. And I think all of that is starting to happen in CS too.
Let's talk about that right now. By the way, please, for those of you in the audience, ask questions. So I'll look in the question chat bot, and then I'll go ahead and then ask the panel questions. So let's talk about money. I'll tell you, I'm the CEO of a growing company. If someone asks me for more software, I'm just going to shoot myself in the head, right? I mean, and this is probably what your CEOs are saying.
Yeah.
And it's just Look, I'm kind of I'm joking, but I'm not. Okay, so let's talk about money, asking for money, filling out the tech stack if you don't have it, changing the tech stack because we're saying it needs to evolve. Any best practices on making the case for building out your tech stack? And Greg, I'm gonna go right back to you because you started all this.
Oh my gosh, I have so many thoughts there. I am going to take a page from Melinda's book though, because she says something when she talks about journey and journey mapping and the importance of that exercise. And I couldn't agree more. Like in my head, we need to be talking about the problem we're trying to solve. We need to be thinking about what exists inside the organization today. We need to be helping the organization understand where an investment in CS technology is smart, where it's going to, how it's going to scale and grow with us, what it's going to look like in 3 years. But I think you also have to be asking questions. I don't see enough of this, and I want to see more of it inside organizations. Like, how does this decision to look at CS technology specifically impact the rest of the organization? So to Melinda's point, like other people besides sales like revenue too, but sales has technology and process in place already. So where are there overlaps? Who owns today? Who owns the CRM? Who owns the email distribution process, the marketing automation technology? Which components are we talking about that are actually CS specific? Is this a reactionary decision to buy something because we have a current pain point? Have we done sort of the right work internally to determine what tools exist, how we can best utilize them? Are we getting redundant or replacing those tools? There's not enough of the pull back and look at the problem, the business problem first. And I don't mean to steal your thunder, Yuman, but I know that you are big on data and data replication and control of data. And I think we're getting close to that part of this conversation as well, which is like, how are we making sure that we're seeing the field, we're looking at the entire customer journey, and we're not just further siloing functionality.
So Greg, I don't disagree with anything you said, but if you came to me as a CEO and asking me for money, I'm not going to give you money, right? Like you just said, hey, there's, you know, he's like, I got to pull back and look at everything. Like ask me for some, Melinda, ask me for money right now. Like, what are the tips that, you know, that will convince me to like, you know, give you some budget dollars in 2022 for the project, you know, that you need to fill out your tech stack?
Yeah, I'm always going to tie it to revenue, and I'm going to tie it to and the revenue comes in different forms. It's either retention, so focusing on improving gross, something like gross retention or net retention. I'm also going to, this is very top of mind for us right now, as we're growing very rapidly here at Pendo. And I'm a big believer that you can't scale a CS team with humans alone. So I'm talking a lot about product-led, which is Pendo, digitally led, which ChurnZero is part of the tech stack that's helping us, and then human-led. That ecosystem of product-led, digitally led, and human-led motions need to be part of the solution for us to grow this team and continue to generate revenue, drive expansion, improve PRR, we call it portfolio revenue retention. So I'm always going to tie it to revenue, which is really the business case that I'm using internally to make these investments.
You also mentioned a little bit about, you know, sort of combining product-led with human-led. Do you also focus on profit and margin, like saving money? Like, is that a big part of how you talk to a CEO? Like, hey, I'm going to improve revenue, but I'm also going to decrease expenses. Is that, or do you try, yeah, which side works, or is it sort of some combination of both?
I'm chuckling because this is an ongoing conversation that I have with our CFO, and the focus, the conversation there, quite honestly, is we need to bring down the size of our books of business and our enterprise base. Mm-hmm. And the challenge that I've given our corporate and scale team is, you know, right now we're sitting at about probably 1 CSM to 250 customers. And I've challenged my leader in that space and said, what would it look like if 1 CSM supported 1,000 customers? What would that look like? So on one end of the spectrum, the long tail of our customers, I'm really leaning into a scale motion, a digitally led motion to increase the ratios that we're supporting there with the humans that we have on the team. And then I'm obviously also introducing a higher touch model, more upmarket. Those two hybrid solutions are really our big focus for next year. And that's where I think what's been fascinating for me as a CS leader is coming to Pendo and really understanding the product-led space. That that creates a shift in the role that CS plays in the business that I'm actively, learning and navigating. And so this tech stack conversation is very near and dear to my heart as I think about, community. How are we building community? How are we, automating our engagements with our customers in a way that still feels very human led and is targeted in real time, and maximizes the resources that we have.
Yeah, no, hey Jay, I know, at Higher Logic, adding a community, right? Maybe having your prospects and customers add a community, there's always an ROI question, it's always getting the
Yeah.
budget. What are your thoughts on getting budget for parts of the tech stack?
Yeah, well, I was going to just lead off by telling Melinda if you need to build a community, like we should talk because
You're on our short list today.
I go back to what Melinda said, and so I think the way you segment your customers is a big part of it. I like what you said about portfolio retention rate because I don't know if this is actually what you meant there, but it conjures for me like looking at our segmentation, looking at the different business segments, large, small, industry, spend, all the different things that we factor into our segmentation. So I think you have to be able to show the impact on that business segment, whether it be driving revenue up, which is, you got to have some faith, right? But so part of this is about modeling and being able to show a vision for what the numbers are going to look like, not only to your CEO, but maybe more importantly, depending on the size of the business, your CFO, right? So it's got to tie back to that. I would also say that not all software companies are the same. Many are growing top line revenue very, very quickly. Many are slower growing and are really focused on driving profitability in the business. And you see that more and more as the SaaS market is maturing. So having situational awareness to your business and understanding what your business objectives are, whether it's to grow at 50% in top line revenue next year or to maintain a healthy gross margin and an EBITDA margin that is attractive to buyers. I think, and this is sort of getting up on my soapbox, but I think every CS leader needs to be educated on the business realities of SaaS. And there's something called the rule of 40 or maybe even the rule of 50 now that companies are looking at, which is if you combine the growth rate and you add that to the margin, gross margin, or the EBITDA margin of the business, do they equal 40? Like 15% growth and 25% EBITDA would be 40, right? That's good. That's going to be a healthy place for your business to be as would-be buyers or investors look to invest in the company. So that maximizes enterprise valuation. I'm taking it all the way there because that's what the CEO and CFO are thinking about, right? And every decision you make, if you're going to be a business leader, as opposed to just focusing on customer success, if you want to be a business leader, if you want to seat at the table, you got to think at that level and then bring it back down to where you are and show how you're going to impact those metrics one segment at a time, back to Melinda's point. So that would be my answer. I don't know if it's too out there.
No, I let me double down on the rule of 40. I hope it's not the rule of 50 now because it just keeps getting harder. But let's if those of you listening have not heard of the rule of 40, I would say Google it. It's a simple way for different subscription companies to compare to each other, right? Whether you're high growth, high margin, sometimes it's really hard to compare apples to oranges. This is one way to try, and it's simple. And I think if you hit the rule of 40, you're not only good, you're in the top tier. So just take a look. And by the way, if you don't reach it, that's okay, right? There are moments in time, don't get too flustered by it, but it's actually just a really good rule of thumb. Let me add one thing about asking for budget, and I'd like to hear if you guys agree with me. Sometimes, everyone has an ROI story, right? Every time, a marketing person comes to me, my CMO who's sitting right over there, he's always going to say, I'm going to bring X number of leads. It's going to be blah, 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 blah. It's going to be great. It's like, I know it's going to be great. Okay. So the ROI, yes, of course, you got to do it. I've heard it a million times. How about saying, hey, look at these other departments that are super meaningful to the company. Sales, marketing, finance, HR. And let's take a look at their stack and what percentage of their expenses is in the stack and how much are they spending on their stack. And hey, guess what? Our most valuable asset is our customer. So we need to be spending an equivalent amount, if not more, on our stack, right? So if the ROI argument doesn't work, because I'm hearing it every day, how about just comparing yourself to other departments? Does that work? What do you think? Thumbs up, thumbs down on that one? Or is that just a fool's errand?
Well, I don't know. I don't know that would make it past my boss, because it's like,
Well, they have one. She has one.
right. Yeah. It's like, it's sort of like my kids, I guess, too. It's like,
Not
it's
fair.
not fair. It's what you need. Right. And so I think, I don't know, playing a comparison game between an apple and an orange feels like a tough way to make a business case. But look, I mean, technology is, I mean, go back, read, Crossing the Chasm, Jeffrey Moore, right? Classic book. It is the people who are going to win in the industry are innovating, and they're not innovating, to Melinda's point, by adding new headcount every time they have a problem to solve. They're adding technology, they're adding tools. And so we should be actively looking for ways to find competitive advantage in our businesses, whether it's retaining customers or selling new customers or delivering a better product for customers, using technology to do that, so we can scale and really have those inflection points to be better and to leapfrog our competition.
It's not going to work here. Chip, we need too much. We have to, I hear this argument too often. They've got one. We need one too. Like that's not going to work. He's going to like throw you out. And I think the truth is we have a lot of technology. When I hear that argument, what I think of is like that is the definition of siloed tech purchase. Like I worry about the fact that we're adding technology. We already have things in place. We have Salesforce. Salesforce is is going to be the system of record, right? They're going to live with software. So we're going to push data into the CS tool. Cool, but how does everybody that's already using Salesforce in marketing and in sales get back some kind of insight that CS now has, because they're pulling data? But how we put I don't know that let's add another thing because we should is the right argument. I think if you're looking for budget, the clarity around how this improves what we have, or it improves cross-functional insight, makes the business operate better, is way more effective than we need it because of the ROI.
All right, Greg. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Melinda.
I'm smirking a little bit because so much of this conversation I'm actively having in the business right now. We're in FY planning right now, so there's just a lot of these conversations happening. And at the risk of sounding contrarian, I agree that taking that approach is not a good long-term solution. I don't think it's going to force any sort of decision for investments. I actually actively used that conversation to open up the discussion with our CFO around the investment that we're making in CS. And the way that I approached it was exactly that. And it was, we're in the process, obviously, of FY23 planning and all of this stuff, and really just getting aligned to hit the ground running. And we are investing really heavily on sales methodology, sales training, certification, lots of investment there. And my conversation was, if we look at, I was also trying to actually get funding for the journey mapping work that we want to do. But I literally said, if you look at, and we're putting it under the umbrella of this One Pendo initiative, which I love, right? It's like delivering a One Pendo message to our customers, putting our customer at the center of that discussion. And I literally said, this fraction of that investment is what I'm asking for, so that we can actually deliver on that One Pendo promise. Like there's the messaging and the narrative, and then there's the actual execution around it. And the execution involves the tech stack. The execution involves understanding that customer journey. And that was the entry point for that conversation. So I don't think it's going to be the decision maker. I don't think it's going to force any decisions around it, but I do think it could be a good starting point.
So I'm going to summarize that it worked. Right, Melinda? I mean, it worked. Hey, they got it. Why don't we get it?
I phrased it a little differently, but yes.
Well, I think it's maybe to use sort of more sophisticated terms, it's really about benchmarking, right? Let's make sure that we are spending our fair share, that we're not underinvesting, and there are a lot of benchmarks in sales and marketing on what you ought to spend, because they're just more mature stacks, and that will happen for us as well. And so until those benchmarks come for our group, right, maybe a comparison will or may or may not help. Your mileage will vary. Take this advice with, it's a risky advice. Two of us don't believe in, and Melinda killed it with it. So that's the way I see it.
Well, if I could just put a bow. Sorry, Greg.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, if I could put a bow on it, I'll go back to something Greg said. Like, let's be real specific about the problem we're trying to solve. So is it an enablement problem for the team so that they know how to have the right conversations? There's a training thing, right? You can compare that, but it's still a specific problem that's leading to an opportunity that we have to either retain revenue, grow revenue, or increase the profitability of the business. So I think it's a combination.
All right, so I want to, and the questions are coming in, so I want to ask maybe one more big question, and then we can dig into some of the audience questions. All right, so let's talk about data. Okay, we do have a lot of stacks. We do have maybe someday there'll be one stack to rule them all, right? And then we get to run our organization on one stack. I don't see that any time in the near term. But what that means is that sales, marketing has one, sales has one, CS has one, customer support has another, so on and so forth. And we're integrating, we're swapping data everywhere. The data is in 10 different places, simultaneously. So you have to think about the data stack as well. Anyway, so what's the role of a well-functioning corporate data layer, right? Or at least your data strategy in actually in designing a good CS stack, right? So, anyway, what comes first, data, tech? Greg, I know, you brought this up earlier. Maybe I'll swing this to you for the first comment.
I see tech stack and data stack, or data layer, which is the term I would use. Like, those are different things. I see they have different. We're having different conversations there. One thing that's, and I'm gonna play the Melinda card here. Like, I'm internally I'm laughing because this is a conversation we're actively in. Like today, this is what I did this morning, and we have a maturing CS function here. We have a CS stack evolving here very quickly, very rapidly, which is part of where my observation comes from. We now have, a CS ops owner. We have a rev ops owner. We have a marketing ops owner. We're an education platform. So we have an education ops owner, and those things have to talk to each other. But the reality of what is visible to whom in which function areas, now that we're trying to push this data together and or copy the data and or have the data visible in different places, is disparate. So maybe one group is seeing something another group isn't seeing. Maybe data is flowing this way and there's insight for CS, but that insight now is not visible in the tools the other function areas live in. I believe that the next step is to think more holistically about data layer. Maybe what we need is a data layer owner, not individual, function area owners, not a CS ops person, not a rev ops person. Like, what's the difference? Shouldn't we have someone who owns that layer?
At Pendo, Melinda, how do you think about the data? I mean, it sounds like Greg just made it even a bigger problem, right? So he's stressing me out. So Melinda, give me an answer here.
This is going to be a tough one because we're definitely in the throes of figuring this out at Pendo. When I think about different operational functions, they do tend to be, sadly, siloed. And, I guess I come back to, this is not how we have it structured at Pendo, but I do come back to needing some sort of an entity that is looking holistically at the customer experience as opposed to looking at it through a lens. So kudos, Greg, for even having a success ops function, because I think that's also relatively new.
It is, yeah.
In the same way that, companies are figuring out CS functions and how they're structured in the organization. And so I think a lot of companies don't even have a success ops function. So what I see is just oftentimes, if you don't have any sort of entity or governance group that's looking holistically at the customer experience and the inputs that go into that, then you kind of look at those different ops functions and hope they're working together. I think the other scenario that often exists is you don't even have a success operations team. So the CS team is generally reliant on either revenue operations and or marketing operations or other operational groups to try to have their needs met. So this one's really hairy for me. I think it's a very difficult conversation if you're not having it from a singular unified lens, as opposed to having several different groups coming at it with their perspective.
All right, so Melinda, it says it's hard. Jay, I need an answer. Jay, what's your answer?
They will bring it home.
I think so. Okay, so an ops function within a line of business like the customer org or the sales org or the marketing org, it's about more than just systems, right? It's strategy and planning. It's processes, systems, and enablement. It's a bunch of different pieces. I think the question here, and where we're trending as a business as we mature at Higher Logic, is like we just brought in an FP&A leader in our finance team to financial planning and analysis. And what that function is meant to do is actually we have the content, we have the data, right? We have the financial reality facts about our business, but now we're going a layer deeper and saying, okay, what's driving all this? Like, what's driving this uptick in revenue or this downtick in revenue or margin or profitability or bookings or retention? All those things have reasons why, and it all relates back to the customer journey and how we execute as a team on that customer journey. So to me, and I think in our business, that is going to be the main driver of consolidating the data stack underneath the customer journey. So we have already started to build out an enterprise data warehouse strategy to feed the data into that process that we need. And it comes from all these areas. I think the more challenging thing that we have to solve is, we run Zendesk for our support, for example, right? We have a CS platform. We have our own community, right? That we engage with our customers. How do we get insights back from Salesforce and our CS platform back into the support platform so that when a support rep is on the phone with a customer, they have the necessary information that they need to treat that customer a little bit more personally than just another ticket that comes in? That's the feet on the street example of the kind of thing that we have to solve once we get that data aggregated and begin to then operationalize it back into these workflow systems that we utilize to manage the customer journey.
Yeah, commercial break. We do that. We push it back into Zendesk. All right. So real quickly, I'm going to add one thing a little bit different. I'm going to be contrarian on this one. I do agree that a centralized ops, centralized data layer where you can really see, you can pull back from the company is super important, right? But hey, there's always the push and pull between centralization and distribution, right? Like highly distributed.
Yeah.
What does it matter if the data, goes back and forth, as long as actually goes cleanly? That's probably the most important thing. If it's just nonsense, going back and forth, then of course you're in trouble, right? But what's the big deal, right? Like if different stacks are communicating with other stacks, so what that there's 10, copies floating in the universe, of all your accounts and your opportunities in Salesforce, as long as it moves well through APIs that are, natively built in a coherent way, doesn't matter, right? It ought to be distributed. No, is that a crazy thing to say?
I don't think it's crazy. I don't think it's crazy at all. But I think at some point it has to come together and be correlated. So the opportunities have to come together with the customer support case data, so you can understand what the cross, interaction between the different parts of the customer journey is, what the results of that are. right? So it's less about the passing it around and more about getting it in one place so that you can actually look at it holistically and do the kind of analysis you need to do to make business decisions.
Sorry, Melinda, go ahead.
Just a very quick point. I think the other thing I would add to that, Jay, is there's that, as well as if it's getting passed around and it's getting treated differently, or it's evolving in those different areas that it's getting passed around in, what ends up happening is, for lack of a better term, you create, I think of tech debt, but like you create data debt. You create these disparate systems where different versions of the same data exists, which over time is just not sustainable. It can create some real problems, revenue impacting problems. So I think that that comes to mind for me, for sure.
Right. The data can't be one time. It can't be a one-time import, right? It has to be fresh. Like I'm assuming fresh data roaming around, the clouds everywhere from different AWS instances, managing your business. Okay, it's nirvana. It's probably, it's probably hard to do. Hey, let me ask a couple of questions from the audience. So this one is, I'm going to summarize. Basically, this is a company that actually is fairly established, but is getting into CS for the first time. So what should her top early investment platforms be? The top 3? And let's not all like jump on this ball here. And what you should buy one. Maybe actually, Melinda, like how would you think about that? I know you're going to start with the journey, but like, is there a way for you to think about the first investments in the CS department?
Yeah, I mean, I think Jay mentioned this earlier, but I think the first place to start, every CS team is different. The reason for existence for CS teams in different companies is different. Are you driving revenue? Are you retaining revenue? Are you driving expansion? What's the role that CS plays in the business? What is your mission and your charter? And I start there. Based on that, I then really try to understand what is it that we need to do to best support our CSMs in executing on that mission. So I don't know that I would start again. I mean, I don't know that I really ever start with the tech stack, because I think the question is, what's the problem you're solving for?
Right.
And, what is it that you're actively trying to support? I will say, I think it's obvious that every CS team at a certain stage of maturity needs a platform. Google Sheets only goes so far. And Salesforce customization is probably not a good long-term solution. Yeah, no, I mean, I'll pull out my, you said your old man card earlier. I'll pull out my old lady card. I remember early 2000s being a CSM at Salesforce and building out a CSM application on Salesforce. This is before any sort of platforms existed. So like, no, I would never do that again.
Right, you're scarred. You're permanently scarred by that.
Traumatized.
Yes. Well, so let me maybe to your point, it's a depends answer, right? Like if you're enterprise, you may need project management software first, right? Like to manage all these complex projects. If it's a low ACV, you need automation, right? So it really is it depends. And so there's a lot of maturity models. Actually, Higher Logic and I think and us, we did a maturity model where it says, hey, where are you, as a CS team, and that can help inform where to make the investment. Hey, a real practical question. We talked a lot about customer journey and mapping it. Is there anything, Melinda, that you use to make that easier? Is it just paper, big sheets of paper on the wall, whiteboards, or are you using anything specific to help with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think generally I always recommend, there's tons of vendors who will help you with this. I mean, it's definitely a hot market. It's actually what I did when I launched my own business after leaving Salesforce. So it was a passion of mine. There's a lot of tools also that will help you just have a template for a customer journey, whether it's, Miro or a bunch of just mapping tools out there. I think there's a lot of really great information to help you understand how to get started. My recommendation is always to be very clear on your scope and intention first. So for us, we're not trying to boil the ocean. We're looking specifically at our enterprise customers. we're looking specifically at the onboarding journey and feeding into the renewal stage. That's year one. That's the scope. But I would definitely recommend working with some consultants or a consultant if you are starting this for the first time.
Let me ask another question, and this was mentioned a few times. So this is specifically, hey, the support team uses Jira, and there's a lot of great information in Jira, but they don't understand the account. And then, oh, by the way, what happens in Jira stays in Jira, right? So that so CS doesn't understand what happens in support. So this is really part of a larger question, right? Great data is being, put into all these stacks, and yet they are siloed. So best practices in unsiloing this. This is a big question. Jay, why don't you take a shot at this one?
Yeah, I think the selection of tools here is really important, especially when you're talking about Jira. And I'm sure somebody on the phone is going to shoot me because I say this, but to me, Jira is a product tool, right? Mm-hmm. And I know they have a service desk platform, but again, it comes back to integration. But so I'll tell you how we have our tech stack set up. We have Salesforce for our core customer data platform. We have a CSP sitting on top of that, customer success platform. We have Zendesk is our support engagement platform. And then we have Jira, which our product teams use to manage their Scrum cycles, internal documentation. That's purpose built for that, right? So I think either you have to have, and I'm not saying everybody has to have the same tech stack we have, but as you mature, you will have more of these specialized tech stacks. They just have to integrate well together, which we do, right? We have our cases visible in Salesforce and our customer success platform. We have our case escalation process from support into product triage and engineering happens from Zendesk into Jira. That's a very well-worn rut in the road in terms of how to have that data flow from one part of the organization to the next, and it flows in two directions. So we always have visibility across those processes. So you either have to invest in that full stack, or you have to invest in integrating the data back into Salesforce or whatever the CRM is in this case that this person's referencing, so that you can see in the system of record what's happening in Jira with the case that got translated over to the product team.
Yeah, I mean, I think investing in a centralized place, sort of, a data only, that has all the data could be interesting. You got to be a pretty large company to have, well, maybe not large, but that is an investment to be made. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Maybe for smaller companies, any other hacks or whatnot to help people share data across stacks? I've got one. Okay. So, and we've invested in this as a company, and not everyone does this, but I kind of think it's going to happen more and more. And that is, more people know that more of the day for the average knowledge worker is being spent in certain applications like a Slack or a Teams, right? And so, many vendors now have a Slack bot. So maybe, and this is a hack, right? Like, the centralized place before you have a centralized data store is a Slack, right? Can you ask for information from a Zendesk, a Jira, your CS platform, about what's going on? Like, just give me some information. And so it's a centralized place that you're in every day, in fact, too much. And it's call response, right? Call response all the time. It's a hack. I don't know. It's probably not scalable, but maybe if you're a smaller company, it can work. Anyway, so one thought there.
Yeah.
Does anyone do that internally? I know I spend a lot of time asking systems via Slack for some small piece of information. Does anyone do that? No.
Have in the past for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. We do that as well with our MPS solution out of Pendo. We do that with our customers, where all of our MPS responses come in via a Slack channel, and based on different responses, it alerts different teams, my team, the marketing team, etc. So yeah, I think that's a good kind of point in time collaboration solution, and it also helps you from a shared licensing standpoint, it also helps you expand visibility while minimizing licensing costs in some instances.
So we have about 9 minutes left, so I want to make sure that we make good use of the time. Let me pull back and ask a sort of an ecosystem question. So we're all in B2B SaaS. Many of the listeners here are in subscription businesses. Many are in B2B SaaS, and we're talking about the tech stack. And it feels, like there's a lot of choices to be made. And guess what? There's going to be more, right? Because the investment in our space is just extraordinary right now. The number of SaaS companies created, on a daily basis continues to grow. The amount of money flowing into the space, generic B2B SaaS is probably 10x what it was even 5 years ago. Okay, so we're coming onto a future where there's going to be more choice, there's going to be more options. And I guess I'm just going to put it out there and say, hey, do you agree with that? And how should we deal with this, as people who buy technology? Melinda, maybe I'll start with you on this one.
I think I'm going to punt on this one. Jay and Greg's perspective.
It's a hazy future, but
go ahead, Greg. Go ahead, Greg.
A noisy, hazy future, Greg. What do you think?
Yeah, man, it's a noisy, hazy future. Like, I think, so I have a pessimist view of investment specifically and an optimistic view. So my pessimistic view is that, like, CS is a hot space. People are seeing incredible success. That's going to bring a bunch of investors. That's going to create a bunch of startups. That's going to create a bunch of noise. I don't know that, like, lots of competition is a good thing. So in the education space, we have 800 competitors. It's insane. It's absurd how commoditized this space has become. Now, education is a 20-year-old, tech environment, and this is largely what happens. And a lot of that was driven by investment. There's a ton of opportunity, but what you've got now is, like, these really niched sort of offerings. Some of it's at industry level. So you've got, like, education for healthcare versus education for tech providers. Then you've got function areas. You've got sales enablement education versus customer education, right? And the same thing's probably gonna happen in CS too. We'll start to see these sort of niche players emerge that focus on specific industries, specific size of a company, mid-market, small SMB. I think the problem there is that, like, as we get too noisy, then buyers become jaded and the space becomes competitive, and then it becomes commoditized. And then all the smart people jump because they want to go work on something that's less competitive and a lot more fun. And this feels hard. That's my fear for all of this. Now, my opposite side says you're going to bring in a bunch of investment. There's going to be a lot of money, and then smart people are going to come solve the problem. Right? Jay's a smart person. He's going to solve the problem. So, like, Melinda's super smart. She's going to, like, in Pendo, they're going to solve that problem. It's like, that's the optimistic side of me. You've already solved the problem, buddy. I think that's why we're all here, man.
So, okay. So I like the answer, but that's vendor specific, right? You had a vendor view of competition. How about the buyer's view of competition? And I don't know, Melinda, you're buying.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just gonna say, from a buyer's point of view, do you welcome more choice? Do you welcome 800 vendors to choose from?
No.
No.
I have an issue in general with, you give me more options, analysis paralysis. No, I mean, when this is a case for every tech stack, but just in our CS selection, we started with about 30 vendors, and it was just insane. I
don't even know how you got. I mean, we're just making up names, because I don't think there are 30 vendors in this space.
Half of them, I was like, I haven't even heard of.
Okay,
of
all right.
So, so I think, and then I also think, Greg, to your point, there are vendors who, there are vendors who service large enterprise companies. There are vendors who service, smaller, early, mid-stage companies better. There are, vendors who have a different angle. It's more relationship marketing-ish versus actual, workflow management. It's, Pendo plays in this space from an onboarding perspective. So there's so many different angles to it, which is kind of why I say, like, it's on, I do feel a little repetitive, but it's like, I'm not going to start with the technology because I really just want to understand what's the behavior that I'm trying to support. If the behavior that I'm trying to support tells me I need to go get a marketing application, I'll do it if that's what I'm trying to do. But it's just, there's a lot of choice out there. I think the market is exploding as I've followed it over the last 20 years, and we've been in it in the last 20 years. This particular space is on fire, and I think there's just it makes it the more solutions that are out there, it makes it very difficult for buyers to really make the right decision.
So Melinda wants no part of it. Jay, what do you think?
Well, I actually think more options are good. More innovation is good for all of us. I think it doesn't matter if it's customer success or anything else. The world trends toward platforms over time, right? A lot of the innovation you see in the space is a product, right? Or an idea, or a very specific, to your point, Melinda, Greg, very specific problem being solved. Mm-hmm. But when we buy technology for our companies, especially as you mature, you're not just buying a solution to a problem. You're buying a partner, or you're buying a platform to start to solve multiple problems. So I think it's going to this cycle will not stop. In fact, it will continue to speed up. There's so much money in the market right now to fund these kind of ideas. And the reality is you don't have to build a platform, right? There are only so many Workdays, only so many Salesforce.coms that can start from scratch. Most products actually start, or most platforms start as a product in solving a specific idea, and then they grow and start to incorporate the other pieces around it until they emerge as the leader, the platform in that particular area. So I think, again, I'll call this out. I see a lot more innovation starting to happen around the customer engagement side as it pertains to customer success. So how do we actually facilitate the interactions with the people that we're trying to connect with? How do we keep their attention? How do we provide them value without having to be on the phone with them all the time, and all that kind of good stuff? So I also think, Greg, for you with 800 competitors, Melinda for you, for me, Mon for you at ChurnZero, all these products, because it's so easy to create them, they all trend toward the same feature set, right? So what's the big leveling field? What's the big differentiator? It's customer success, customer experience, a reliable business to do work with, right? To have as a partner. So I think that's, again, as you mature and you move away from the shiny, bright object, you move toward who's going to be the best partner for me, who's going to be in business the longest, who's going to be around to see the light of day a year from now when I need you.
Oh, software doesn't matter is what Jay's saying.
Outcomes matter.
Outcomes matter. Okay.
Matter, right?
Yes.
We can deliver them.
Well, hey, this is a fantastic conversation. I know we can go on further. Hey, thanks, Jay. Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Melinda. And thanks, everyone on the big rig. And we'll see everyone soon. And you know how to contact everyone here. Just check out our websites. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Talk to everyone soon.